Hello, everyone, and thank you for supporting this event. We are with Woods County talking about first responders, first responder stressors, specifically at a time of pandemic. So we have an exciting group of panelists, and without further ado, let me introduce Amy, who is with Woods County, so she can start off the proceedings. Thank you, Amy.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. My name is Amy Coe, and I'm with the Wood County Adamus Board. I am the director of their community programs. Kaylee?
Hi, my name is Kaylee Molman. I'm the Wood County Marketing and Programming Assistant, VISTA. Basically, VISTA stands for Volunteers in Service to America, so I get to work closely with AWACBA and the Adamus Board. Anything you want to add, Amy?
No, thank you, Kaylee. I just want to welcome everyone to our first part of our mini conference in appreciation of our first responders. This is for our week of appreciation that was originally going to be held May 3rd through May 9th, and it was rescheduled for this week due to the pandemic. So in light of the pandemic, we have opted to offer some online trainings and beneficial webinars to our first responders, thanking them and thanking all of you for your service. So we're really excited that everyone could join us. Just so everyone is aware, there is 2 additional webinars after today. The next one is on Wednesday at 4 p.m., Wednesday the 23rd, and the last one is on Friday at 9 a.m. So we're hoping that you can take advantage of as many of these as your schedule allows. So a little bit about the Adamus Board. We help fund essential programs for mental health and addiction services in Wood County. And one of the things that we have been tasked with is thanking our first responders specifically for dealing with the opioid crisis. That's how the Week of Appreciation really got started. But really, the Week of Appreciation has turned in a more broader thank you because we recognize that first responders go through a lot on a day-to-day basis in regards to trauma. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of all of you and providing those vital resources. So we'll talk more about resources on Friday, specifically local resources, if anyone needs additional information about that. If anyone has any specific local questions, you can reach out to me. My email address is acoe@wcadamh.org. So thank you again, and everyone enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Amy. And I would like to go ahead and introduce our panelists in no particular order, but let me start with Dr. Bob, who is a clinical psychologist, an educator, and advocate for mental health and substance abuse. Quite frankly, his accomplishments are just too long to list. He's also has been a first responder and was involved in helping in 9/11. So Dr. Bob, we have Steve Kahn, who is a celebrated firefighter. He's also a nurse. Again, over 25 years of experience. Again, too many accomplishments to list. And Dan Malloy, Chief of Police, moved into, he's part of the International Police Chiefs Association. He has spoken all over the country, advocate for mental health for first responders, and also heads of the Department of Public Health in his area. So without further ado, I'd like to pose the first question to Dr. Bob, insofar as this is a particularly stressful time for all first responders, but particularly so given the nature of the pandemic and its and how long and how extensive it's impacting all sort of operations. Dr. Bob, what would you like to start with? Dr. Bob, when
No, there, I'm sorry, I had a little problem with the mute button. Anyway, it's a great great question, Andrew. Thank you, and thank you for the kind introduction. I think to frame this panel and to give a baseline for understanding where we're going, I would like to just say quickly that, folks who are first responders are typically used to dealing with what might be traumatic events for other people. In other words, that's what you do when you're a first responder. You deal with different kinds of events, and then you come back. You have time to get well, to get back to your family, to get back in balance again, and then you go to the next one. What's happening during this time is that the button stays pushed. You keep withdrawing, from finite resources. You keep drawing till there's nothing left to draw, and for that reason, you don't have the time to come back in balance again, and you don't realize that because you're the brain says, I'm doing what I typically do, but you're not taking care of you. So the focus becomes on others. You're taking care of your family. You're taking care of your job, and you're taking care of the crises that come up on a regular basis, but you're not taking care of you. And when you lose that focus and it's like taking money from a bank account. If you keep doing withdrawals and you never do deposits, you're going to have a deficit. And when that point comes, you can get yourself in pretty big trouble. And not only do you get in trouble, but you may start making decisions which are not really the right ones, so you can hurt others. You think you're doing what so when you do that, you feel bad about it, so you try harder, and it's a snowball going downhill. The harder you try, the worse things get. So we need to understand how you intervene in that process, and how you focus on self-care at the same time you're focusing on caring for others.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Dan, what are your thoughts on what Dr. Bob introduced?
Well, I think Dr. Bob's absolutely right. I think from the, I kind of speak from the leadership perspective, looking at what our responsibilities are as leaders to make sure we're paying attention. And we have the relationships already developed within our organization. So when you start asking questions about the well-being of an employee or someone within your workforce, that they actually believe that your intent is, right, that you're not just asking to pull them off the line or to take them out of their duties or take them out of the roles, that you actually care about them, and you're wondering, what's necessary to make them, safe or feel more comfortable, or realize that you're right. And Dr. Bob said it, we've been responding to, traumatic related events for careers, and that's part of the normal business. It's just, when's the decompression now? When you're constantly being faced with an ongoing pandemic and all the other things that we deal with, what's the system set up within our organizations to be able to talk about it, deal with it, address it, resources availability, all those kind of things. And are we comfortable within our own organization to have a conversation like this? Is it okay for, Chief or me or somebody to walk up to an employee and say, how are you doing? And I absolutely believe that you're going to get an honest response. And I think that's the, we have to be preparing at all times for someday, and we're dealing with someday kind of right now. And I think that's something we just have to, as a leader, we have to be understanding of our role within that environment.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here, Andrew, just because that's what I do. I jump in a lot. Just to piggyback on Dr. Bob and Dan, what they're saying here. Our first responders, our frontline personnel, including our dispatchers, our nurses, our doctors, our social workers, we pretty much live, our adrenaline for the unknown is what typically drives us. And when the pandemic started, obviously we had a lot of changes. Things were up, things were down. We lived for that change a lot, and we were able to adapt and overcome. But now we're 6, 7, 8 months into this thing. And like Dan was just saying, now's more than ever, the leadership our frontline leadership, our administrations, our organizational leadership, now we really need to pay attention, because that adrenaline bank, like Dr. Bob was saying, is starting to probably run thin. We've made too many withdrawals, and we haven't been getting a whole lot of deposits back in there. Now it's really important to start engaging with our personnel. Just sit down with them. How are you doing? How's the family? We're going to be hard pressed to find anybody in our ranks that has not been touched personally within their family by either a friend, a family, an extended family member that has been affected by COVID. And as this continues on, and we go into the winter months and start looking at now the flu season, is it, with the anticipation of that, no other time has it been more important to really engage our personnel and start addressing this resiliency factor, and just sitting down and having those conversations with our personnel.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I mean, one of the issues, I mean, it's almost a paradox, though, that the busier, the more sort of chaotic the situation is, and therefore the less time one feels that has to attend to these very sort of pertinent issues. How does the leadership intervene to find the time to be able to create the space for these conversations?
Andrew, I think
I'll take a quick shot at that, but then I'll let the leaders talk. Okay. And I'll just say quickly that I'll talk from a psychological and behavioral perspective. It's all about modeling behaviors. For me, for leaders, it's all about the shadow of the leader. And what the shadow of the leader means to me is when the leader models the behaviors he or she expects from their subordinates, that's when things change. But when the information just comes top down, without that demonstration, without that sense of being comfortable in the situation, I don't believe anything changes. But that's just from the perspective of a behaviorist.
I think, Dr. Bob, you nailed it. And to Steve, we are, do you talk the talk, or you walk the walk? I mean, do you just sit up and tell us what it is, or the world of, as they say, most leaders' responsibility is to communicate the message. Well, how do you communicate it? Is it via a strain of emails, or is it through a presence? Is it through a regular engagement, just conversations? You set the environment, and I always said that as a leader, I control the environment. That's the one thing that I can have some influence on. Being present, being available, make the men and women of our organization know that I actually give a damn, and what does it mean for them? It means you're working in a 24/7 capacity within, police and fire, especially, and, within the ED worlds and the hospital networks, the clock never stops. So I think it's, a presence and being present and demonstrating that you care about all the people, not just the ones that happen to work 8 to 4 when you work, on your proverbial shift. But, I think that it's important that, you represent something, and that representation, like I said, you got to start working on that a long time before the crisis hits, or else you got a lot of work to do. But you can't not say, well, I never did anything, I don't care, I'll just let it ride. I mean, that's what a leader has a responsibility to engage. And engage, a lot of it has to mean engaging your personnel and being available. And, no matter whether it's Christmas or Saturday or whatever you have, or 10 o'clock at night, you need to be present with your officers, your firefighters, and your staff. Because, that's when they work. You can't just care about them between the times that you work. So you have to demonstrate that. To your point, Dr. Bob, you're dead on it.
I also think that as a leader, a certain amount of showing vulnerability, and to show that, as a leader, I'm not immune to what's going on. I'm down in the hole at times with my personnel, and with, this stuff has affected me personally. The amount of runs that my people are going on. My family has been affected by it. Showing that empathy, crawling down in that hole with your people sometimes, and letting them know that, you're there for them. And showing that vulnerability that you're also subject to the same types of stressors and the emotions and the feelings that are going on. I think that goes a long way itself too. And I think, like Dr. Bob says, that's modeling what you want your people to do as well. You know, that you want them to come to you with their issues, whether it's organizational or if there's something going on at home. And that's what a lot of our peers are, you know, peer support programs are doing. We're modeling that behavior by showing, hey, you know, we're vulnerable too.
You know, Andrew, to your first point, you brought up the chaos, or you didn't use the word chaos, but I think, you know, one of the things we used to, you know, we're most comfortable sometimes within the chaos, you know, because the rest of, at that particular moment, the outside world and all the issues and the family and all those things that are going on before that particular run comes out, and that involvement and it kicks in your experience and all your training and what your expectations are to do and to serve. That often is time. That's where we have a moment that this is the most clarity that we have. I mean, this is what we really enjoy. This is what's in our heart, and we're really good at it. So that is good. And then when that's over, then we have to return to the world of everything else. And that's oftentimes when we struggle a lot. And we find the most difficult is we return back to the normal part of the world, and that requires additional thought and then process and responsibility. So, you know, often that chaos is something that we find solace in, is because that's what we're really good and that's what we train for, especially as, you know, like police and fire, we like that.
Well, thanks for that. And we just had an audience question, so please do hit the Q&A button and keep sending them along. The question was really regarding, and this is to all panelists, what are specific signs of as with new or different types of stresses? Dan, you just mentioned sort of a baseline sort of level of stress, but what are we seeing right now? What is different perhaps, or?
So you're asking, I just want to understand the question, Andrew, you were breaking up a little bit. You're asking about the signs of stress or the symptoms that someone starts to feel, you know?
What are new and different types of stress that we should be paying attention to?
You see, that's a wonderful question, and I hopefully I'll give an adequate answer to a wonderful question. I'd like to give a wonderful answer. I'm not sure I have one, but I do have an answer, and this is why this is really the challenge. Let me just give you a quick lesson in this, and there are, each one of us, let's think about a chain around us, kind of a chain of chain of protection. We have what's called homeostatic mechanisms within our body and mind that keep us in balance. And when we're out of balance, we have these mechanisms that put us back in balance. So it's like we have a protection around us, and think about it as a chain. Well, everyone has a link, a weak link on that chain. And our weak links are different. And that's the problem. And that's the challenge. And that's what us professionals need to do sometimes, is sort out where they are. Let me give you an example. For some people, they'll start to feel emotional problems, anxiety, depression, anger. For other folks, it's going to be physical, back pain, headaches, neck pain. You know, for other folks, some other folks will isolate. They'll be behavioral. You know, they'll start eating more. They'll start hiding in different places. They'll isolate themselves. So for each one of us, it's very different. So what we really need to look at is really, and for the supervisor, for the leader, what he or she is looking at is, when does the behavior that's typically expected start to look very different? And they can take that, you know, when, you know, for example, if you're normally producing 10 widgets, and I know you guys don't produce widgets, but you'll see what you'll see where I'm going. You know, and now you're only getting 5 widgets. Something is wrong. And then, you know, so once you establish that something is wrong, you can connect it to that weak link and then do the intervention that needs to be done, whether it's exercise, whether it's eating better, whether it's sleeping, you know, or at the end of the day, whether it's therapy.
You know, and just to provide some examples, what Dr. Bob was referring to, you know, what does it mean to us? I think, you know, one of the things that I used to look at, you know, You know, I got an employee that responds, always at work 30 minutes early, always has his vehicle packed. He's always always ready to go, prepared for work, sitting there when briefing starts, just waiting for that first opportunity to get out and do the job. And then you start seeing that, well, it's 15 minutes and then it's 10 minutes. And then, you know, they're walking in as briefing starts, and their uniform isn't as well presented as it usually is. There's, you know, an inspection there, you know, used to have spit shine boots. They're no longer spit shine. You know, the demeanor, the way they take care of their hair, everything that it presents itself, you know, and what you used to be or what you normally serve as, that should be something that clues to us as a first line supervisor or as an organizational leader is, you know, hey, when's the conversation? And a lot of times those are difficult conversations because you're asking someone what's happening with them. And it's not exciting. Hey, just want to tell you, boss, that I'm struggling at home. That's not usually what you get out of it. But again, that relationship building is important, whether it be at a shift level or an agency level, that you're truly working in the best interests of not only the organization, but that employee there. So to say, how are you okay? And where do you do it? What's the setting in which you choose to have this conversation? Is it after everybody leaves, or are you going to do it right there in front of the 8 other people that are sitting in that briefing room? You know, you have to think about those things and what's appropriate. So there's a comfort level and trust that, you know, you truly are operating in the best interests. I want to know what's happening so we can get better, not so I can write you up for a poor uniform presence at the briefing or whatever that kind of be. So sometimes it's those little nuances that in big picture, still on time for duty, still looking okay, but compared to what, you know, Dan did before, something doesn't feel right. So I'm just going to ask and see what we can do and help Dan out. So that was always what it meant to me.
I'll say one of the things that we're hearing more and more about, and it actually started coming to light with the as the opioid crisis continued on, is that idea of the vicarious trauma, or that the compassion fatigue, where you know, we say that don't get me wrong, firefighters, police, nurses, we've all been known to talk up a good story when we're back at the work, when we're back at the station, but when we see the behaviors start changing out there in the field, when somebody's give a damn is broken and they're not caring as much as they used to, and it just seems that the compassion is not there. And you know, we get into this job to take care of our citizens, our friends, our family, our communities, and when things just don't seem like they're meshing and things are out of sync, these are cumulative stressors that build up over time. It's like that death of 1,000 cuts. You know, as they continue to build up, then we start seeing the compassion fatigue, where you're not caring about your own appearance. When those behaviors start matching some of what they've been saying, I think that's another indication that an intervention might be on the horizon for them, and we need to start paying attention to them.
Yeah, thank you. Actually heard, really what I really heard is you have to know your people, and that leadership really involves sort of a certain level of vulnerability in order to engender the trust. Can you talk more about that? How do you continue to engender trust and continue to be vulnerable in a leadership role to really be able to have this conversation about mental wellness?
So that's really important, Andrew. And so here's the thing. You can't, if you haven't been doing that historically, it's really hard to just switch gears. I mean, you can't, if that hasn't been the way your organization has been structured, if that isn't the ethos, the belief system, the narrative of your organization, it's very hard to say, okay, now we have all this stress, so I'm going to be kind and I'm going to listen. And as Steve pointed out, which is so damn important, is show your own vulnerabilities and show your humanness, the sense that you are a human, you are a human being out there as well. You're not a machine, and you feel similar things, that empathic stance. So it's very hard. So if you're in that situation, if you have an organization that has not been able to, did not work from that perspective to begin with, that organization sometimes needs organizational therapy. Now that sounds kind of weird, I guess, to some people, but you can approach, everybody understands what individual therapy is, but you can actually have, you need an organizational therapy to create changes, somebody who really understands organizations and systems so that they can help you realign, so that you can get into this in ways that make sense. Because you just can't come in one day and say, okay, guys, now I'm kind and a nice guy. And before that, I was just a autocratic guy who did it my way or the highway. So it really, a lot has to do with the history and what the belief system is in that organization.
Dr. Bob, one of the things we did, like you had said, it's not something you can change overnight. Several years ago, we decided in our region around Cincinnati that the issues that we're talking about right now needed to start being addressed. And a lot of it came out because of the burnout or the compassion fatigue based on the number of opiate overdoses that we were seeing, and people's a lot of give-a-dams were broken at that point in time. So we started in this region really embracing the peer support through the different firefighter associations. The FOP in the area had a very good critical incident stress management program, and we started to really start changing the culture of the fire service and police service in our region to the point where now we currently, the numbers are astronomical. The numbers of people that our peer supporters have, we have about between our regional peer support, Cincinnati peer support, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 200 peer supporters between the police and fire in this entire region. And in just the past 2 years, we've probably seen over 200 or so individual referrals to our peer supporters, where we've then helped them along the way or helped refer them to professional clinicians, or up to and including actually escorting and accompanying somebody who needed help to an inpatient facility. That doesn't come about overnight. That comes about over a long period of time of doing what's right, sticking up for our personnel, showing that vulnerability, and then the administration saying, we encourage this kind of activity. No punitive actions being taken against anybody that I'm aware of, as long as they've been involved in these processes. So it's a culture change, and you're exactly right. It doesn't happen overnight.
Well, as they say, it takes a while to change culture. And I know, sitting in the chief's role and understanding that, the well-being of our organization and this individual is on me. And this is something they didn't teach us in chief school. These are the steps that are necessary in the event of a critical incident or an accumulation of incidents that can absolutely wear people down. Because we saw, you always used to say around 5 to 7 years, you're going to start seeing the typical burnout. How do I save that 7-year employee from, going down that rabbit hole and then ending up, either out of the business or whatever, because they started out with great enthusiasm and with a great desire to serve. And then over time, they just couldn't do it anymore. So what are we going to do differently? And the reality is, there's things that have occurred and decisions that were made in my position where other organizations looked at, our officers said, why is your chief why are we sending them to a debriefing? Why are we providing critical incident stress assistance? That's weak. That's a weakness. So it was a really big conversation you have to have organizationally that, we're going to do this. We're going to take care of our people. There's a tremendous amount of investment that we put into the men and women who we serve as leaders, that we want to keep them. We want to keep them healthy. And to Chief's point, it doesn't change overnight. But the reality is there's always going to be those organizations and those people in those leadership positions that feel that it's not an appropriate. Police officers, firefighters should be taught for all those things that we heard along this journey. But the realization is that there's services that we need to provide because whether we like it or not, we are humans and we are human beings, and we have to deal with all the things that everyone else deals with as a society, as families and so on. But we also have to deal with a lot of the traumatic incidents that occur in a community, and they call 911, and guess who shows up? The men and women that have a uniform most of the time. and we have to figure it out and then go home and figure it out again. So, you know, being available for our folks is not, it should not be that hard, but to your point, Dr. Bob, it is still a process, and it's not necessarily, not every organization has. And I think in Ohio, there's 890 plus, you know, law enforcement organizations, and, you know, that's a lot of different perspectives, and that's a lot of different leadership input and decision making. So, you know, to Steve's point, the growth and development of the peer has been, you know, it's been powerful, and it's been immense, because it does provide folks and officers and firefighters another resource that can be viewed as confidential and viewed as they can talk to without repercussions upon their jobs, and they can just better themselves as a human being. And then it's just, it's cool to see the growth and, you know, the use of that peer support entity within public safety in our region. And I know it's growing across Ohio for sure.
It's pretty obvious, you know, probably to everyone here as well as myself, how Dan and Steve are so forward thinking and so ahead of the curve in this. And, you know, I'm sure the people who are involved with these folks are really, you know, very, very fortunate. You know, and we mentioned critical incidents, stress debriefing, and all of those things. But, you know, one of the things that Dan touched on, and I always like to put some psychobabble on top of it because that's what I do, but we call it pre-incident debriefing. And there's actually pre-incident work that can be done in an organization that prepares people to get, you know, in other words, you know, if you reach the incident half full, then you're, you know, or just on the edge, you know, you're likely to be tipped over. But if you reach the incident farther back from the edge and you're on firmer ground, you know, then you're more likely to, you know, recover from the incident and be able to go on. So we want to make sure that the people who are responding, as you point out, to the incident are not, you know, waiting for that last straw to push them over the edge. So we have to do that pre-incident, you know, work, as well as the incident debriefing and critical incident debriefing that we do.
And I think that organizations that understand what Dr. Bob was saying in terms of organizational therapy, I have this theory that just like we are human beings, we are living, breathing beings, I think an organization lives and breathes and expands and contracts, and they are susceptible as an organization to everything that we are as individuals too. So when you have something inside your organization, death of a member, suicide, line of duty death, death of a family member that affects the core of your personnel, your organization is going to go through the same Kubler-Ross stages of grief. You're going to see decreased productivity. You're going to see anger. And if it's not managed and actually steered by the administration, and the way they do that is by setting up that culture to say, it's okay. Let's talk about these tough subjects. Let's get through this and actively steer and go away from those big rocks, and they get back out into open sea. And that's all about that whole culture and just taking care of all of our people like that.
Well, I mean, I'll share this. You know, we had tragic line of duty death in 2008 of 2 firefighters in Coleraine, and I watched from the outside as the police chief, you know, just what Steve's talking about. And then I watched within our own organization from the relationships built up and friendships that have been developed for many, many years within, you know, between police and fire and those specific individuals. And, you know, I watched just the influence of that chaplain corps and that relationship and the usage and the conversations that were occurring. And it was something that told me, you know what, we need to provide. I always thought chaplain corps was for the external service at the time of a tragedy or a family death, that we could bring those folks in to provide solace to the families. I never looked at it, you know, from the field as an internal, you know, tool to help our own people, and, you know, just to be around and just be available, not anything specific, just watch kind of how people, you know, resonated or just evolved. And So it was something, again, it was watching and learning that, man, that's because it's still suffering in our community for those losses, and we're still working on that. But the reality is, what can we do differently? What do we pay attention to, and how we move forward? It's just, sadly, the work never stops, but we're still human. As Steve said, we're still human beings, and how do we deal with this? What the heck do we do? And who does anybody even care? I mean, does anyone care that we're out here to shuffling these runs and handling this business? And we just lost 2 great friends. It's just a lot and we all deal with that in different ways. And it's just something that, like to Dr. Bob, having conversations ahead of, being aware and being open to the conversation so they know what our intentions are as leaders, and, what our goals are to make them better, help them, because we're all facing this in different facets. It's just, what's the comfort zone in respect to having that conversation? So it's just a huge issue that we sometimes, for how many years, never even talked about because we just didn't do it. So the fact that we're having a conversation, that Wood County's open to the conversation is neat to see how we're evolving as a profession. And we appreciate the folks that actually care enough to allow us to have these conversations.
There's no doubt. I think, you're both spot on. Organizations are just another system. They're not very different than families. And if you just think about it this way, it's like looking at a pond. And what happens when you throw a rock into a pond? Those ripples affect the entire pond. And that's exactly what happens in an organization. And the highest stress points are when someone comes in and when someone leaves. And when we lose someone or someone new comes in, and we're trying to readjust that organization. Because what we forget is that each person that comes in affects everybody else, and each person that leaves affects everybody else, because the entire organization has to now find a new balance, a new homeostasis.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. We have a question from the audience regarding new signs and symptoms of stress for family members for or with first responders. What is new, different for family members of first responders? And you were just starting to touch on that.
I don't think there's, there are two systems, and we were just talking about this. So we have the organizational system, we have the family system, and those systems, one of the things that's interesting about them is they overlap. There's kind of this kind of thing going on. They one impacts on the other, and the same kinds of criteria, the same kinds of things you look at in organizations, you look at in families. And you look at the same thing. When is the family now at the point where they're operating on their edge? What are the normal things like? So Dan was saying, well, for some people, it's coming into work on time, it's shine shoes, it's whatever. For families, it's other things. Are they isolating? Are they coming down to? Are they not eating well? Are they gaining weight? All these things, but they're different for different families. So what you're looking at is, what is your normal way of operating, and now what is out? What is not, and when does it become? And I think a really important question that is kind of a follow-up question to this, Andrew, is when does those behaviors require more than just start exercising, eat well, and sleep, because we all know that's what you ought to do. But when is it beyond that? When is it that, hey, I can't exercise because I'm too tired. I can't sleep because I'm too anxious, and I eat on the run. When does it get to a point where you have to say, oh, stop. We really, we need to do something now, or we're going to have serious pathological consequences.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Steve or Dan, do you have any thoughts on really being able to assess the operational ability of your team members through interaction with the family, through being able to see where the family's at? How do you sort of engage with that?
Well, this is something that was not always well received, but it was something that I did for our plainclothes, drug unit. because of the craziness of the hours and the craziness of the work they would work 24 hours in a row because they're on a case and they were doing surveillance and all these different things that are cool and exciting. But I would stop them in the hallway and ask them, "So how's your family?" And they'd look at me and go, "Well, why?" I'm like, "Because they're on the other side of this, are we communicating with them?" Or, and I told them when I started it, I will stop and I will, from time to time, I will call your wife, I will call your family member, your husband, whatever, and I will just check in and make sure everybody's doing okay. Because ultimately, this is an assignment. This is not, a 20-year journey. I want you to be healthy. I want you to be safe. And I want the family to still, be healthy when this assignment is over, because it's a hard life for, it's 100 miles an hour for oftentimes a short period of time. And then they come out on the other side and do other things. I want the family to be there with them. And it took a lot of communication, a lot of understanding what I was trying to do. Are you just trying to get me out of the unit? No, I want you to go home and have a healthy relationship. I want your spouse to not say, "Well, where the heck have you been for the last day and a half?" Or "Why did you drive to Tennessee?" When you're doing, all these kind of things that can occur when you're engaging in that. So it's just a matter of conversations and to Dr. Buffett, a little pre-effort, letting them know ahead of time, this is the whys, this is the what's going to happen, having these conversations ahead of the action, just to let them know where your head and your heart is. I mean, again, it's one of the things I guess we learned very early, or maybe some later. We were at one point in time, we were very technically sound in our ability to do our jobs, and we take great pride in that. And then over time, we lose connection to the technical roles that we serve, and we become more akin to the job and responsibility associated with the assets. And the assets are our men and women who we serve. And so I might not be able to write that ticket or manage that DUI the way I could a year and a half ago or 3 years ago or 10 years ago, but I can take care of the folks that put the uniform on that I'm responsible for. And I think that's something that, personally, I took a lot of pride in, and I realized that I'm okay asking the question about the ticket or the whatever, but I'm not going to make sure that I do everything I can to take care of those folks. So having those conversations before, during, and after, that's just something that became part of my DNA when it came to, handling that leadership responsibility.
So I think, of course, obviously firefighters being the absolute best profession that you could ever be around. We have a little bit of an advantage over our brothers and sisters in blue, and definitely an advantage over dispatch, nurses, doctors, hospital workers, and you'll see where I'm going with this. We have the ability in the fire stations, we have that traditional lunchtime, dinner time, meal time around the table. That's our family time. Every third day, we sit there at the table and we say, "How was your weekend?" I literally, 2 hours ago, I just asked my entire crew, "How was your weekend?" Of course, they all thought, because I was getting ready to ruin the rest of their week, because they thought that I had some kind of nefarious behaviors going on here. But we get that opportunity. We can find out. You find out so much sitting around the table. Police can't do that because they're sitting in a squad car by themselves. Our nurses and doctors can't take the entire shift and sit there. Our dispatchers, our local dispatch center, their lunchroom had 2 chairs in it. They've got 25 to 30 dispatchers sitting in there, but they can't take a group meal. So you have to, they built time into their dispatch, their shift reports, so they can sit there and do an after shift report. And some of the times they don't even talk about the details that they were dispatching. They talk about what's going on in their families. How are things going? I learned this from Simon Sinek. He had a great talk about putting the phones down before a board meeting, and they sit there and they say, "How's your dad doing? How's mom doing? How did your little boy do last week? I heard he had a big baseball game." That's the connection. We start making those connections. Then we realize when something's off on somebody, and our crew, it might not be performing the way that we would really like. To me, that's a huge advantage to us. And those organizations that realize that interpersonal communications and that contact that are important, they can build time in, whether it's before shift, after shift, or even routine get-togethers, even with families. But to me, that's how we do it in the fire service. we sit around and we find out who did their homework and who didn't, and who got in trouble at school. So we find that out at the dinner table.
Chief, you make a great point, and we've talked about this many times, that capacity to sit and debrief, whether it be at the meal, whatever, is awesome too. Again, it's just thinking about it. You do things sometimes just because they feel right. In our off-going shift room, they call it a ready room. They were all individual chairs at a tabletop that would along the wall, so nobody ever looked at each other. And one of the companies in our community was closing down, and they had these big tables you could sit about 12 people around. And I'm like, yeah, I want that. So now you can sit around the table and you're looking across from each other, kind of in the way that the fire does. But at the end of the shift, when you're off the radio and you're just doing paperwork, but you're just hanging out, but you can look at each other and just, whether you're telling jokes or giving it breaks or talking about the work or whatever, you're becoming human again and realizing that, let's just debrief, reduce a little bit of stress before we walk out the door, get back in that car, and then drive home and give it that window before we drive back home, and then get, deal with our families. We want to make sure we're in an appropriate state of mind too. So sometimes it's the little things like Steve shared it that don't cost anything, don't make any, but it's an opportunity to just, be human with each other. Otherwise we would, we're not robots. And I think that's the thing that some people believe we are. We are humans and we have an input on this thing. So Steve, you make a great point. It's cool to see how that works, and how the firefighters really just, they take care of each other that way.
Thanks, Dan. It's interesting because earlier on there was a question about whether all the panelists believed in having peer support, and I think that question is being answered thoroughly. But perhaps the reason the attendee was asking is perhaps because they don't have peer assistance in their organization. Just wondering whether you would have some recommendations. I mean, my sense is that any member could advocate for that to be part of their agency, but perhaps both Steve and Dan have some specific experience with that.
So I know that Wood County is just on the south part of Toledo and down in through Bowling Green. And I know from the fire service that they've experienced their share of pain and anguish in 2014. They did have a double line of duty death as well up in Toledo. Now this may not be in Wood County, but it's definitely right up against Wood County when they butt up. And we know from experience that we're all family. It doesn't, families don't stop at borders. So I know that Toledo Fire has representatives on the Ohio Association of Professional Firefighters peer support team. So they do have a peer support program up there in the region that they could reach out to. And I know from my contacts with the OAPFF peer support, it doesn't matter whether full-time, part-time, volunteer, someone needs help, they need help. Doesn't matter if actually, I know in my particular case, it doesn't matter if it's police, fire, EMS, doctor, nurse, respiratory, janitor, family member, family's family, and we're going to help them to find resources. That's what the big thing about peer support is. We listen, we normalize, we help them to understand that what they're feeling is their feelings, and it might be normal for them, but they don't have to suffer. Let's find them some type of help, and then we help them and guide them to resources. So I know from up in that area in Wood County, that would be a great place to start in looking to establish a peer support program for fire or police. That would be a good starting point. And I know that as far as hospitals go, some hospitals are starting to create their own peer support programs within their organizations. There's a couple of programs out there. I know one from Duke University in North Carolina. Dr. Yeager at Ohio State University Medical Center has a great program called the STAR program for inside their own hospitals. And he has gone out teaching the programs around the country as well. So there are ways to get started if they don't know. I would say the OAPFF be a great place to start, and from there, be ready, because it'll be a snowball. Once the ball starts rolling, there'll be all kinds of resources that start showing up and start being made aware of.
Well, just to follow that up, Steve, that's what, a lot of the Friday focus is with the Friday session at 9 a.m. is to not only, introduce the Ohio Mental Health and Addiction Services, their first responder liaison, Steve Click, and then the conversation about peer support, what's already operational up in the region for Wood County, not specifically to Wood County, but who else is operating in this capacity in there, and to introduce you guys to them. So there's someone maybe that has a face, I know that person, or I've heard of her. That conversation, to Steve's point, that you can ask questions and maybe facilitate some operations moving forward. So that's a kind of going to be a big focus, or almost the entire focus of what we do on Friday with the webinar on Friday. So hopefully you can come back and join us, and we'll talk more about the evolution and the growth of the peer development, the peer support folks.
Even more than that, these are things that are specific to Wood County, but let me give you more of a general perspective, because, you'll be doing Wood County on Friday. And there are a lot of people maybe from other places. See, the thing is that there are tons of resources within the community, tons in every single community. The problem always is access and a bridge. And it's really important for organizations to create those bridges and to learn who those stakeholders are in the community, so that they can create bridges to those services, and so that they can so that people can have access to those services. Typically, when people get stressed, when they're in trouble, the first thing they say is, "I've tried everything and I don't know what to do." They feel up against the wall. They feel like that they're under their rope. They need access to services, and sometimes those services are not just clinical services. Sometimes it could be anything from, child care to transportation. It could be 100 different things. But developing those avenues. Sure, peer support is great, but you can't end there. It's not a be all and end all. It's a way to create a road forward. It's not a way to solve the problem. And once you begin to understand that those peer folks, those peer support people, need to have the support to develop the access to those services that I would promise you that are embedded in every single community. But they're, just getting the right person to the right service at the right time is a really big part of this.
What I hear, Dr. Bob, is something that we always used to say before COVID hit, is the reality is our collaborative efforts to work in and around the heroin, the opioid epidemic, is the growth of collaboration, the working together with people that we never ever worked with before. And that can be a myriad of folks, but bringing our folks to the table and making those relationships over the past several years can allow, an opportunity to say, hey, you know what, we're also dealing with, the mental wellness of our employees and our first responders, and how's this relationship look like? What is it? What can we do if we can, if we can have someone show up at the fire station on Christmas Day and asking for assistance and treatment, for their opioid use disorder? What if that's a firefighter? What if that firefighter walks in on Christmas Day and says, I need help? What resources and what agencies are going to be available for them? Because on that Christmas Day, we absolutely got that person connected to treatment and for their opioid use disorder. Are we going to have the same open door availability? Have we built up enough relationships and enough partners for when our first responders come to the door and say, we're ready? That's something that we need to work for. But I think we've kind of built a foundation over the last several years, at least in our regions, that where we've been working on the opioid crisis, the folks at the table are much more diverse than they ever were when it came to what we talked about with law enforcement and fire. So, I had to hope that maybe we have a little bit better standing as we get into a little bit deeper conversation about mental health and availability of services than we did maybe 10 years ago. So.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I mean, it also brings to mind some experiences that I've had here in Salt Lake City working with first responders. It does seem that the community as well needs to be educated about the needs of first responders, specifically the behavioral health community, because what sort of shows up as perhaps looking like PTSD is actually very, very differently experienced by first responders. So integrating peer EAP and general sort of education for those who are interested in working with first responders, that does seem to be a good result. We are, I believe, actually coming to the end of our time today, but Dan, you had mentioned 9 a.m. on Friday. I also know that we are back at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, this Wednesday. Wondering if there were any last-minute questions from the panel. We've got just 4 minutes. It's a question about family members. I think we'd sort of seen, perhaps not answered it fully. Any other signs about of stressors that we're seeing right now from as a result of the pandemic that ought to get a mention, and perhaps we can go more into it on Wednesday?
I would think, since given our time frame, Andrew, I think that I'm going to suggest that people tune in on Wednesday at I guess it's is it 4 o'clock Eastern? Is that right?
That's correct. 4 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, at 4 o'clock Eastern, because I don't think I can. I could barely say my name in 2 minutes, let alone give an explanation to such a wonderful question. And that might be the great place for us to jump off on Wednesday. And so come on back, and we'll move forward with some those kinds of more clinically focused questions. Is that fair enough?
That works. Thank you very much, Dr. Bob. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dan, and everybody who was able to attend. And we look forward to having you here next week. We have a not last-minute audience member, peer member from Woods County Peer Team, Wood County First. I'm a nurse. We have about 17 members: nurse, fire, EMS, corrections, LE, dispatch. I found that we're way ahead of others. We're working with some from Toledo as they're interested in mimicking what we have. We could not have done it without our 8 Adams, and we are so lucky and grateful. So it's a positive message there. Thank you all for joining us. Look forward to seeing you all again on Wednesday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dan.